Hello and welcome to Law and Liberty, a Texas Attorney General podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee Date, and I am here today at a roundtable with Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, Associate Deputy for Special Litigation Patrick Sweeten, Deputy Division Chief Todd Disher, Assistant Attorney General Eric Hudson, and Special Counsel Kathleen Hunker. Prior to the 2020 general election, Texas positioned itself as a bastion of election security and greatly reduced the risk of fraud thanks to the talented attorneys at this very table. They cracked down on security measures, ensured every registered voter in Texas had an equal opportunity to cast their ballots, and pulled more all-nighters than they will ever admit to while fighting for this cause. So let's get comfortable, get started with the hot topic of the year, election integrity in Texas. We've had a lot of rumors in the mainstream media that election fraud does not exist. In the rare cases that they do report on instances of fraud, they say it's not enough to sway an election. What's your reaction to people who say that it flat out does not exist?
So it's just wrong, because we know for sure, we prosecute it here. We're dealing with cases every day related to election fraud that's reported and that ends up being verifiable and that we prosecute. So we know that it happens. I don't think anybody knows the degree to which it happens, because even our office, who probably prosecutes more election fraud than almost anybody else in the country, we started off with one prosecutor. I think we now have 3 and some investigators, but we don't have enough resources that we've been given to cover all election fraud. So it's really hard to know how large an issue this is, because very few states put any resources in to actually detect or prosecute voter fraud.
Our office also saw around 12 civil cases involving election integrity, and these dealt with different issues with security, administration, all in the months leading up to the 2020 general election. And this was overriding laws written by the legislature, changing ballot order, polling and drop-off locations, signature verification, and a lot of other issues. Can you all give me an overview of some of these cases?
Starting, I believe it was October 31st of 2019, our division began to handle what would end up being a dozen cases that were attempting to seek changes to laws passed by the legislature, and 11 of those 12 cases sought relief prior to the November 3rd election. So obviously during the last year, the folks here, the attorneys here and other attorneys that aren't here, have been very busy in defending the state, defending the legislature, defending state laws, defending governor's orders related to the election process. And we're happy to report that we were successful in stopping any of those lawsuits that sought changes before the November 3rd election. We were successful as to all of those cases that sought to change the legislature's enacted laws. And so the folks here, Todd Disher, our deputy chief, Eric Hudson, and Kathleen Hunker all worked in our special litigation unit in an effort to take on those cases. Now, many of those cases were brought by political parties. I think we counted that the Democratic National Committee filed 5 cases, Texas Democratic Party. Some of them were about cases, laws that have been on the books for 50 years. I'll tell you about a couple of them. One was ballot order. Since 1965, when there was a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor, the law has provided that the party that the governor in power, that the candidates are to be listed in accordance with who the party in power is. Well, in 2019, the Democratic National Committee sued the state of Texas seeking a change to that law. And that law had not only been passed in '66 by Democratic governors, by Democratic legislators and Democratic governors, but it had been recodified and recast by other Democratic legislators in the 1970s and again in the 1980s, at last under Governor Mark White.
But now, of course, it's unconstitutional.
Right.
Just now.
Right, just now.
And
50 years
only
later.
in Texas. New York has had the same rule up since 1896. And then you have other states led by Democratic governors where you didn't see a similar lawsuit.
And so that was one case that we were tasked to defend by General Paxton, and that was to, and all 12 of these cases were in federal courts in the state of Texas. There were 7 judges total that had those cases, and we had to work, during that year. I would say there's probably not a weekend that some group of us haven't been up in the office working on defending these because there were just preliminary injunctions after preliminary injunctions. But I'm happy to say that we were very successful in our result, and it was as a result of the great work of this team and the Special Litigation Division.
And I think part of the upshot of all of those successes is you're not seeing here kind of the level of post-election litigation like you are in some of the other states. For example, one of the cases we dealt with was regarding the ballot receipt deadline, when mail-in ballots have to be received by counties in order to count. The plaintiffs in that case, again, I believe it was the Democratic National Committee, were seeking to extend it by up to a dozen days post-election. So anybody could, bring their ballot in late after, the election day results were being reported. And of course, that just leads to a whole host of problems. And you're actually seeing some of those problems play out in states like Pennsylvania, where here in Texas, through no small efforts of this office, we've been able to successfully stave off much of that post-election litigation.
Yeah, I'm convinced that the work you all did, I think there was definitely an attempt to make Texas like what happened in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and other states, Georgia. But your work basically fended all of that off, because that certainly seemed to be what the goal was, to put us in the same type of situation where there was some chaos after the election. And as we all saw in Texas, we got our votes counted that night, and it was a normal election without all the chaos in some of these other states. And I think these lawsuits were designed to create that chaos, and I think Texas handled it in the right way. And had these other states defended their state laws prior to the election, I think we could have avoided this entire mess that we have now.
And we still had record turnout in the state. Yeah. So.
Which is the good news.
That's
Despite all the complaints about people not being able to vote, the reality is we made it more accessible than we ever had. And we accommodated the whole COVID issue, and we did our best to do it while following state law.
Yeah, I think that always gets lost in the conversation, but Governor Abbott deserves a lot of credit for expanding access to voting during the COVID pandemic. He extended early voting for both the July runoff and then also for the November national election. He also extended the access to ballot delivery locations during up to 40 days prior to the election. I think he deserves a lot of credit that's not necessarily given.
And we had a number of other cases that we handled. We defended against a challenge to the legislature's House Bill 1888, which was the mobile voting bill, which maintained that if you're going to have mobile voting, then it needs to be maintained during the entirety of the early voting period. We defended the straight ticket bill that was passed by the legislature in 2017, and in that bill, Texas basically joined the majority of states. I think it's up to 43 that do not allow straight ticket voting. That also was challenged, and we successfully defended that case as well. And we had a lot of help, obviously, through the Office of Solicitor General. The great thing I like to say about my division is that we partner very closely with our Solicitor General attorneys, who were also on the same floor as us. And so we act as the trial arm. The Special Litigation Division is the trial arm for for a lot of these types of voting cases, and the Office of Solicitor General is there in the event that an appeal is necessary. So it's a very close coordination and effort.
That's awesome. And you guys have defended a lot against confusing voters and any kind of issue that may come with votes not counting, where they're turning in their ballots. But what effect does this have for the people administering the elections? What would happen with them if you hadn't won these cases?
Well, sure. I can speak to that on for example, the straight ticket voting challenge. That bill to repeal straight ticket voting was passed not in 2019, but in 2017. Then the implementation date was delayed for basically 2 more years to give counties the opportunity to adjust, to educate voters on the end of straight ticket voting. No lawsuit was brought until just this summer, right before the 2020 election. And talking with county election administrators, their concerns were tangible. You could feel it in their voice, that having to go back to a system that they now had 3 years to move away from was going to cause an enormous burden on them. And luckily, the Fifth Circuit stepped in and granted a stay of that injunction, so we could go forward with the 2020 election without the straight ticket option. As Patrick said, the vast majority of other states in the country have done as well.
So I have a question. What do you all think was the most important case of all of these? I know they were all important, but was there one that stuck out, like we just had to win this case.
Yeah, I think Kathleen alluded earlier, there was a case in San Antonio that we defended against, and they were seeking multiple changes, and one of those was to allow for mail-in ballots to come in after the election. They were trying, one of the remedies that was sought is to invalidate a Texas statute that doesn't allow, that prohibits folks from, outside to help a voter vote. So it's sort of aimed at vote harvesting.
And actually, in that case, one of their experts even was advocating for paid employees of campaigns to be able to deliver ballots on behalf of voters. What could go wrong with that, obviously?
And so that case was in San Antonio, and we were able to successfully hold that off, prior to the November election, and no changes were made. We felt like that was a security measure that's in place. But all of them, it's sort of, it looked like part of the strategy was to try to flood the zone and to hit us with all kinds of different cases. And luckily, we were able to, as a unit, and we've got some really experienced litigators, we've got some great writers, some great courtroom litigators. We were able to fend those off, but it was we were juggling a lot of cases at any given time.
Do you all think it was a national strategy to sort of change the way the election resulted?
I would say not only was it a national strategy, I think it's, in hindsight, they're going to look back and see that it backfired. I mean, the irony of all this is, the record that we were able to build in many of these cases has led to, I don't want to overestimate it, but a sea change in what the law looks like around voting in elections. So we've got good case law from district courts and also from the Fifth Circuit that I think are really going to help us secure elections going forward.
And to that point, one other thing that our group, again, in conjunction with the Solicitor General's office did is they would bring a lawsuit here, we would beat them here, and then we would go help other states defeat similar lawsuits. So, you can come after us here, we're going to travel to where you are.
Right. We have, and to your point, we have filed amicus briefs in other jurisdictions involving the same issue. But yes, the same ballot order attack against Texas occurred in Florida, occurred in West Virginia. And so I do think it was a coordinated national strategy on the part of the Democratic National Commission to, litigate many of these same issues that were litigated in a lot of other locales in the U.S. So.
And I hinted at this before, but you can also tell the national strategy based on the states that they targeted, because many of these rules and laws exist across the country. So you have Democrat states with the same rules, but those states did not see the same type of litigation. So it was directed towards changing outcomes in states that the Democratic National Party thought that they could perhaps see some movement.
Going off of that note, all of these cases were resolved in a matter of weeks leading up to the election. It was some of the fastest movement that I've seen through the court system. Was that national strategy why it was so important for the courts to resolve these so quickly?
Well, I think that's part of it. I think, we had this, election set for November 3rd, and so that was a natural deadline. And so as cases, and many of these cases, strangely, were not filed until pretty late in the process. I think we had a case filed in August seeking a change. And people, what I don't know that people understand is that preparations for elections are occurring months and months in advance. And there are obviously problems that can occur in locales, in administrating elections if there are changes being made up to and close to the election date. So, we faced sort of this natural barrier, which was election day. And everything had to be fought off before then. But one case, I think we were talking about it before we came up, one case actually wasn't decided until I believe it was October 26th. So we had some very late participants, some very late challenges. Some were earlier, but that kept this group going from one case to the next really over the last year. To try to fend off those attempts to seek preliminary injunctive relief and changes to the Texas election system.
Now these cases were filed all over Texas, right? They were different places. They were, and I guess I have a question about that, but also, why were so many of these cases, do you think, filed so late? Because they could have been filed years ago.
Yeah, some of them, absolutely. For example, the ballot order statute we talked about has been on the books for 50 years. They filed that lawsuit in late 2019. As we talked about, straight ticket voting was passed by the legislature in 2017. It was not challenged until I believe it was the spring of this year. As far as why that was done, it's hard to say. But what I can say is that presented a real challenge because they were all being litigated simultaneously. And so we were, attempting to fend those off. I would say another layer to this was some of those changes sought changes based upon the COVID-19 pandemic. And so that, I think, was probably part of the cause for some of the late timing on those. Nevertheless, there is there's a doctrine called Purcell, which is from the Purcell versus Gonzalez case from the United States Supreme Court, that says, late election changes are disfavored because they can cause confusion amongst election administrators and amongst voters. And so they really, we obviously argued that issue in multiple federal courts. You're right, they were all over the state of Texas. They were filed in the Southern District, and we had some in the Western District, various judges. I think we counted a total of 7 federal judges. Some of them had 2 or 3 of our cases, but we ended up, successfully fending off any changes prior to the November election.
And you all ended up in front of the Texas Supreme Court and the Fifth Circuit at least on 1 or 2 occasions.
That's correct. We were in front of the Fifth Circuit on maybe 5 cases, I believe it was, and some of the election cases did end up in the Texas Supreme Court. And so that's again why we really are relying upon a partnership with our Solicitor General's office, whom we work with at each stage, and we obviously assist them during the appellate process because we're cognizant of the facts and the arguments we've made in the trial courts. And then, we rely upon them for strategizing because many of these cases do end up in the appellate court.
Why don't you explain how our Solicitor General's office inside the Attorney General's office works and what their purpose is, because some people may not quite know that.
Yeah, the Solicitor General's office is, in my view, the leading Solicitor General's office in the United States. They work in state and federal intermediate and final appellate courts. So we have our current Solicitor General, Kyle Hawkins, has argued to the U.S. Supreme Court multiple times, to the Texas Supreme Court, and our Solicitor General, attorneys. So they're mostly appellate lawyers, but it is a very busy shop because many of the trial cases that we end up handling or other divisions handle. We have multiple trial divisions, as you know, in the division. In the agency, they end up in the Office of Solicitor General. So we have a very busy and very adept group of Solicitor Generals who I'm proud to have a chance to partner with and work with.
One of the key points, too, is that the Solicitor General's office works with us usually from the start of the case if they think it's going to go into appeal. So it's a lot of groundwork from them early on in the case that gives us help and allows us to sort of direct our litigation efforts.
Yeah, there's no doubt that they are key to our success, and you all are also key to our success. You guys did an amazing job during a really challenging time because it wasn't like you were getting thrown one big case. You were thrown, 12 big cases, pretty much all at the same time. And then coordinating, it's not always easy, coordinating with another group of people who also did a great job. It was almost seamless in how well you worked with the Solicitor General's office and passing off cases and then passing them back, because it wasn't always one pass off. Sometimes they passed it back, right? So here's the hot potato back.
Here it is.
So anyway, I applaud each of you for your amazing efforts.
Thank you very much.
And really for what you guys did for the state of Texas and really the whole country, setting an example of what can be done if we do our job defending state law on elections. And the legislature, they're the policymakers. They are the ones that decide how elections are to be done, and our job is to defend those laws. And in a lot of states, those laws were ignored and were not defended. And I think the results showed in what happened in those elections. So I appreciate everything you guys have done.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On that note, we will wrap up today's roundtable. Thank you to Attorney General Paxton, Kathleen Hunker, Patrick Sweeten, Eric Hudson, and Todd Disher for this enlightening discussion. So much good information and all of the hard work in service of the state of Texas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to everyone watching. Hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.